Today, I wanted to speak about the qualities of an orator or a writer, but I say qualities of an orator because that's the lecture I ask you to look at from John Quincy Adams, to which I want to turn in a moment. It's near the end of your source book. I want to use as an example of qualities of an orator, the ethos presented, Benjamin Franklin's speech near the close of the Constitutional Convention and George Washington's farewell address to the nation. Washington was an individual who didn't particularly want to be president and was actually persuaded to do it for a first term and certainly did not want to do it for a second term, but was persuaded yet again to do it for a second term and agreed to do it. There are many possible examples we could select for qualities of a good orator, but I wanted to present those because I think they are particularly effective and because the address by George Washington is very often cited, almost exclusively cited, in the context of his warning the country against what he calls foreign entanglements. Well, we certainly have got into a lot of foreign entanglements over the years. Whether they've been good or bad is another matter. We've gone into 2 world wars, we've gone into Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, many other places in the world too. And I think to some degree, therefore, that warning about foreign entanglements has to be tempered with the fact that the United States has been, certainly ever since the end of World War II, and in many ways since the beginning of the 20th century, a global power capable of extending its power globally for good or ill, both in military and in economic terms. We are entangled in foreign places, whether we like it or not. It's just a fact of life. The question to me is whether it brings benefit to people or not. So I'm going to concentrate on something different in that farewell address, several different things, which really have more to do with Washington's view of domestic affairs, which often are not quoted or discussed from the farewell address, and also have to do with Washington's view of human nature, what he thinks people are like. This is also implied in Benjamin Franklin's address to the Constitutional Convention. And you may say, well, that's a fuzzy subject, but it's actually a deeply important point that both Franklin and Washington are making about their view of human nature and how human nature reacts to public, communal, and governmental situations. It really is. And their view doesn't come just from something that they were taught. It comes from deep, deep experience, very deep experience in many different quarters. Then, I'd like to turn to Joseph McCarthy, who gives a speech early in 1950, which I ask you to read, in which he discusses what he considers to be the communist threat to the United States, a threat after World War II, which was considerable, and which was regarded by McCarthy and others as an existential threat to the United States. I'd like to go over that speech with you because it helped launch what was called the McCarthy era in American politics and political life, and not just politics and political life, but it touched just about every institution in the country, including Hollywood, where people were blacklisted because they were suspected of having communist sympathies, including Harvard, where some individuals were accused of having communist sympathies, and therefore it was said they should not hold faculty positions. It really was pervasive in the entire country. The McCarthy era is called an era because there was fundamentally no escaping from its influence. One of the videos I ask you to take a look for the course is a video of the Army McCarthy hearings, in which the first televised hearings held in Congress ever, and it shows McCarthy with his assistant, Roy Cohn, trying to persuade the Senate committee that it's the Army that is also infested with communists, not just the State Department, and that there are individuals in the US Army who are doing dirt to the country. It's a rather riveting set of edits from those long hearings that constitutes that video. And if you don't recognize some of the faces you see in it, that's fine. But many of the senators on that committee later became very famous, and a number of them became presidential candidates. Scoop Jackson, Bobby Kennedy is there. There are many other individuals who, if you would get a list of the senators and their staff on that committee, you would discover that to some degree it holds much of the political future of the country all the way down through the 1970s. So that's the outline. If you have your source book, please turn to the section on the qualities of an orator that John Quincy Adams discusses. This is on page 286. You have it? The first and most precious quality, then, which contributes to the success of a public speaker is an honest heart. Adams will go on to describe why he believes this is true. A sentiment which I wish, above all others, may be impressed with indelible force upon your minds. On a former occasion, I freely acknowledged my own opinion that the maxim, what's a maxim?
A rule.
Yes, a rule, or not exactly a rule, it's a saying which has almost the force of a rule. Yes, a maxim is usually a particular saying, a particular contention that elevates itself into the force of a rule or a principle, something that is expected to be accepted. I acknowledge my own opinion that the maxim upon which the ancient rhetoricians, and especially Quintilian, so you say, who's Quintilian? Quintilian was probably the most famous of all Roman rhetoricians, one of the most famous rhetoricians of the ancient world, and Quintilian's course on rhetoric was read by just about everyone all the way down through much of the 19th century, and still read by people studying the classics. And indeed, anyone who seriously undertakes the study of rhetoric is at one time or another at least going to look at a summary of what Quintilian had to say. So he's a big figure. It's a big figure. It's like talking about Newton in the history of physics or optics. It's analogous to that. So Quintilian and others emphatically insist on the maxim that none but an honest man could possibly be an orator. And, Adams says, I freely acknowledge my own opinion that this was not strictly true. So let's pause for a second and think of the implications of that. It is not strictly true that no one but an honest person can be a good orator. What then does that mean? What are the implications of that if you accept that? Let me put it another way. If you contest the maxim that no one but a good and honest person can be a good orator, if you contest that, what are the implications? What are you, in effect, admitting?
Someone who's not honest can be a good orator?
Yeah, someone who's not good and not honest can indeed be a good orator. So I have drawn two strange diagrams on the board, which you may have been wondering what they represent. Let's say these are good people here. We'll just use that abbreviation. These are bad people. These are good orators. You happy with that? Philip's shaking his head no. Anyone happy with this? That would be a pretty bad world, wouldn't it? It would be a really bad world. What about this? Here we have all the bad folks, people who are dishonest, here we have all the good folks, and a subset of the good folks are good orators. You agree with that? Why not, Noor? You're shaking your head. You're not smiling, though. You're just shaking your head.
Because there are bad people that can be good orators.
Ah, there are. Are there? Yeah, all right. How many people disagree with that statement? That there are people who are not to be trusted who are also good orators. Anybody disagree with that statement? No? Well, then it seems maybe we have this. Would that be more representative, Noor, of what you would think? So being a good orator is no guarantee of being a particularly good or honest person. And being a good and honest person doesn't guarantee that you're a good orator either. So there may be some corollaries to this. Presumably, everyone would like to be a good person. I hope that's true. Let's just assume that for a minute. Make that assumption. You might have to work to become that. It's not easy in a world filled with temptation and corruption and bad influences. And in some cases, some people see it as the only way to survive even. It's not easy to be a good person. You have to work at it. Is it easy to be a good orator? No, there are very few people who just naturally can stride up and be a good orator or a good speaker or even a good writer. You have to work at it. So you have to work, presumably, at both of these things, at this and at this. It takes effort. Adams then goes on to say something that elaborates on his contention. He says that if you believe that maxim of Quintilian, then the converse must also be true, and every great orator would of course be proved an honest man. But that really doesn't seem to be the case. Then, however, having made this concession, he still wants to contend that uprightness of heart is all important to the qualities of a good orator. In mere speculation, we cannot separate the moral character from the oratorical power. In mere speculation, meaning in theory, we shouldn't separate them. And this is where Adams is actually fulfilling the role of what in the 19th century would be called a professor of rhetoric and moral philosophy, which was the common title. That if you're going to teach the power of oratory, you need to do it in a way which does not separate it from moral character. That's all important, says Adams. He says in the top of his page 346, this is on 287, the reason why this quality becomes so essential is that it forms the basis of the hearer's confidence, without which no eloquence can operate upon his belief. So what quality is he talking about here that we mentioned earlier this year, among that triumvirate of pathos, logos, and ethos?
Ethos.
Yes, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about ethos. He's talking about ethos. And he says that is brought about by the practice of virtue. He makes an interesting exception, an interesting example. If you are a lawyer and you are defending a person who has a bad reputation and is accused of doing something bad, and whom you think might have done something bad, should you still exercise all of your authority, weight, and power in representing that individual?
A man of principle would refuse his ministration for carrying it into effect. So if he's a man of principle, he's not going to compromise on his moral beliefs and defend this person?
Well, who's going to represent that person in the court? That person, don't forget, legally has a right to representation. Is that person, I've said that person's a bad person. Is that person a guilty person? Not necessarily. Why do you say not necessarily?
Well, I think they obviously could have not done the crime, but beyond that, they're still entitled to have a case made for them.
Right. When is a person guilty?
When they're proven guilty.
When they're proven guilty. That's right. That's what that seemingly hackneyed phrase, innocent until proven guilty, actually means. You're not guilty. Yet, anyway, you're not. So that's one of the reasons why Adams says, this is the bottom of 349, the moral character of the lawyer can therefore have not the weight of a feather upon the scales of justice in causes of criminal jurisdiction. In other words, you're not to think about the moral character of an advocate. The question is the moral character of the defendant or of the plaintiff. That's the question, not that of the advocate. Then he says, this is his 351, about 3/4 of the way down, the only advice I can give you for all such emergencies, is before you enter upon that profession, to lay the foundation of your conduct in a well-digested system of ethics. Now, I want to dwell on that for a second, because many of you will go to professional school, presumably of some kind, government, law, medicine, architecture, you name it. Some of you won't, but many of you will. You may be asked at that school to take a course in professional ethics, and that is perfectly just and applicable. The business school gives such a course, the medical school pays attention to it. It's just something that is part and parcel of professional training. But what Adams is suggesting is you actually can't wait that long to think about this subject. Because by the time you get to that stage in your life, your character is fairly well formed. You cannot trust to professional ethics alone to guide your conduct in a profession. Something has to come before that, and that is his point. He talks about genuine integrity. He uses the word integrity several times. What does the word integrity mean? Who here is concentrating in math? Noor, what word can you think of in math that we use that is somewhat related to the word integrity?
Integral?
Yes, integral or integer. And what does that mean in math?
Well, an integral gives the area under the function, or an integer is just a number.
Yeah,
So
a number, what is an integer?
Well, it's just a whole number.
A whole
so it's
number,
one.
but a whole number.
Integrity may allude to something being together.
Yes, to be whole and together, where the entire parts of one character are in harmony and resonate with one another. A person of integrity is a person whom you can't innerly divide and say, well, that part is good and that part's not good, or that person will act this way in one situation, but in another situation they'll just turn around. In other words, and the opposite of having integrity, there are a number of expressions for the opposite of integrity, and they very often go to the number 2. So what would be an expression for the opposite of integrity in which the word 2 is used? Duplicitous. Duplicitous. Very good. That's a more technical word, but I was thinking of something similar. But duplicitous is very good. Two-faced. Two-faced, yes. Or he talks out of both sides of his mouth. Yes, he talks out of both sides of his mouth, a common idiomatic expression. Or the old and somewhat tired translation of a supposed Native American saying, pony soldier talk with, you haven't watched enough old Westerns. It's very stereotypical, but it carries the same. Pony soldier meaning the cavalry, pony soldier talk with forked tongue, talking out of two sides of his mouth. So all of these expressions, and there are more, have to do with lack of integrity. That's what they mean. They mean a lack of integrity. Someone of integrity is a person whom you can trust, you do trust. And once you have that trust, that is your ethos. It's not necessarily your reputation, it's that you trust that person. You absolutely trust them. And that's therefore why Adams says that integrity of heart is most important, because it's conducive to your audience believing you, crediting you, giving you credit. In every sense of the word, giving you credit. Now, sometimes that credit is tested, and Adam's point, I think, is implied that a person of integrity can stand just about any test. You throw anything at them, and when things are uncovered and explained, you will still trust that person. Everyone has weaknesses, but integrity of heart is something that Adam says is all important. It is an active sincerity. Always believing himself what he says, he will possess the first of instruments for obtaining the belief of others. A virtuous orator must have an acute knowledge of the duties incident to anyone in a state of civil society. Then turn to page 294, could you? Where he talks about a university and a college. This is his page 360. And it's about halfway down the left-hand column. An university, now you say we would say a university, but in his day, people would generally put the an because it begins with a vowel. But a university by its name imports a seminary where youth is initiated in all the sciences. Sciences here means any kind of knowledge.